And joining us now from the foyer of the House of Commons are three MPs who are going to shed some light on all the heat we've seen so far this week. They are, of course, our Commons debate panel, Rick Dykstra from the Conservatives, Liberal Ruby Dalla, and New Democrat Paul Doerr. Hello to you all.
Hello.
Hello. By their words, ye shall know them. I don't know if that's the lesson for the day, Rick Dykstra, but it seems to be that things you wrote 5 years ago can come back to haunt you, and Mr. Harper does have that problem with his old fundraising letter.
Well, I think what we need to completely understand here is talk about what's happened over the last number of years since Kyoto was signed, since it was originated, and where we have gone. And as a country, we now stand literally in last place against all of those who have been in the deal. And quite frankly, we've acted over the last number of weeks to make sure that we move forward on the environment, and this is obviously going to be a war on the environment in terms of words, and we're putting action to those words. And obviously, the Liberal Party didn't do that when they were in government for the last 13 years.
But is there a credibility in being critical of not doing anything on Kyoto when you opposed Kyoto at the time?
Well, I think the general opposition to Kyoto is based on the fact that we did not act on it. The government did not act on it. There was a whole opportunity to be able to work towards implementation to meet those commitments that were signed with respect to the Kyoto Accord, and they weren't. Therefore, if you're not going to keep your word by what you sign in paper, then certainly what we have done and what the Prime Minister has done is put forward a plan that, yes, is at committee, and obviously with the work of Parliament can become an act that actually does embody what wasn't done over the last 13 years.
Okay, Ruby Dalla, what do you say to that, and about whether or not the criticism is that the Liberals didn't do what they said they would do in Kyoto, or it's a criticism of Kyoto itself?
I think, first of all, Don, the Conservatives have to start acting like they are in government. They are no longer in opposition. And time again, when we as Liberals are asking them questions, all we hear from the Conservatives is about Liberals being in power for 13 years. I mean, today it was relevant, and I can just read a few lines from Harper's letter, in 2002, when he said that Kyoto is essentially a socialist scheme to suck money out of wealth-producing nations. He goes on in his letter to talk about Kyoto and saying it is our campaign, that is a Canadian Alliance campaign, to block the job-killing economy destroying Kyoto Accord. So it's clearly evident that Stephen Harper and the Conservatives do not believe in the Kyoto Accord, an accord that was signed on by 141 other countries. It is time for the Conservatives to get to work and to show some leadership on the environment.
Well, Paul Doerr, is it clear that they don't believe in it now, or that certainly Mr. Harper, in that letter, didn't appear to believe it in 2002, and in fact he got up in the House and basically said he didn't. He also said he thought the evidence was at best contradictory, that global warming was caused by greenhouse gases created by humans. But anyway, that was then, this is now. Does he have to be tied to something he said in 2002?
Well, we're all accountable for what we've said in the past. But look, Don, the problem now is that this kind of high school debating society that's going on between the Liberals and the Conservatives, it's, quotable quotes back and forth, but we're not going ahead. And what we're trying to do in the NDP is to push ahead on solutions, propositions, and that's what we did in the House today, is to say, are we going to be participating in the UN conference that's being proposed? That was a leader's question. Dennis Bevington from the Arctic was saying that we're going to get on with the East-West grid in this country and build that like premiers have asked for and we've been pushing for years. So let's put aside this high school debating society and get on with solutions, and that's what we're about. If Mr. Harper's trying to do, kind of like Nixon going to China, he's, Harper going to Kyoto, I guess, is the comparison. So what? Let's get on with things and let's move on. But yeah, he said those things, and we're all accountable for our words. But we are also very accountable in our actions.
Rick, is Harper going to Kyoto? Is that like Nixon going to China? That's an interesting analogy Paul put together there.
Well, what we have done, and we saw it today, from the Environment Committee perspective, the Liberals are certainly not entertaining moving forward. They are going to make sure that these hearings and these meetings continue for the next 2 months. Ruby talks about action. We are committed to action. In fact, we
haven't seen any yet.
To be able to get the Clean Air Act to committee took the work of the NDP and the government to do that. We're prepared to act. What the Liberals are prepared to do is to stall, and they've done that for 13 years.
John, that's clearly not the case.
And we are not going to do that.
Okay, Ruby.
That's clearly not the case. the reason that there is a Clean Air Committee, that's been put together to analyze, this Conservative so-called environmental proposal was because that this Clean Air Act had no substance to it. And the bottom line is Canadians do want results. And today, in question period, the Liberals continuously asked the Prime Minister, they asked the Conservatives whether or not he misled Canadians. And I think someone said it earlier on in your report, a leopard can certainly not change its spots. And Stephen Harper, Canadians need to know, does he or does he not believe in the Kyoto Protocol? It's an international obligation that we as a country have, and it's clear that the Conservatives are not following suit.
I got to give Paul a turn here. Paul, the Clean Air Act, as it emerges from the committee, will it resemble the Kyoto targets if the NDP have their way?
Absolutely, we have to. We're committed to it. We signed on to it. It's a legal document. And recall, Don, that this was just the beginning. And we're going to hear from the ICC, the International Commission on Climate Change, that this is just the beginning. And what are we going to do beyond Kyoto? So this was just the first step. So clearly that has to be in the bill, as well as the medium and long-term targets. The problem with the Clean Air Act, of course, was it talked about 2050, and that's long after probably all be around, or anyone else around here will be around, and we had to meet the short and medium-term targets, and that's what we're working on propositions and not just throwing mud back and forth.
Well, Rick and Ruby look like they might be around, but I sure won't. But anyway, Rick, let's go back to this point. If the Clean Air Act, if the NDP try and amend it to look like Kyoto, and Mr. Harper even recently said, well, we can only get to 50% of Kyoto maybe at best by 2012, is this agreement that we've seen between the NDP and the Conservatives to work on the act together going to fall apart?
Well, Don, I think what we've said from the start, and we're the first government in Canada to say that we are going to set targets from a short-term perspective, and those targets are going to be put into legislation, and we're going to anticipate that across this country, not only is government going to meet those targets, but so is the Canadian public. That wasn't in the Kyoto Accord, and if any of that was in the Kyoto Accord, it certainly wasn't met or kept by the previous government. I can tell you.
Okay. I've got to move quickly. Ruby, about 10 seconds, and Paul, 10 seconds. That's it.
I'm just going to very quickly say, all of a sudden public opinion polls are showing continuously that environment is one of the top priorities for Canadians. And it seems rather ironic that this Prime Minister has just woken up in the last few weeks and realized that environment is an important issue.
Don,
Paul, last word.
Yeah, quickly.
And that's it.
We don't. There's no deal between the NDP and the Conservatives. That's for sure. We forced them to put it to committee, and now we're saying to all parties, put forward your best ideas. Let's get on with it and stop bickering. And that's what we're up to.
Okay, Paul Doerr, Ruby Dalla, and Rick Dykstra. Thanks for this. Talk to you soon.